I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, it's August 14th, mid-afternoon here in Israel, the day before the vaunted Last Chance Summit to be held tomorrow in Qatar. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen at the summit because, as you know, I don't do predictions of that type. I don't do prophecy. But I do want to break down a bit of where we are going into the summit so that when it happens, we'll have a good background to understanding how things are going. Before I go into the details, I just like to preface by saying that it's inconceivable to me that a terrorist organization, Hamas, is actually invited to a summit. Can you imagine back in the good old days, America inviting Al-Qaeda or ISIS to join them in a summit to discuss the future of the region? But, well, that was then and this is now. And we're just going to have to live with the fact that Hamas has been invited. Whether they show or not is another question, but we'll come back to that. The lead up to this summit is somewhat analogous to the naive American, I would say even American Ivy League tourist wandering into the classic Middle Eastern bazaar. The United States, of course, playing the role of the American tourist, and the Middle East playing its natural role as the Middle Eastern bazaar. Let's take a look at how this is playing itself out. So first of all, as anybody who's ever been to the market, to the shuk, whether it's in Jerusalem or anywhere else, to any sort of haggling or negotiation, you know that the first step in your move toward purchase is to let the shopkeeper know, A, that you have absolutely no interest in his goods, and B, if you did, they are so below standard that you're hardly willing to pay a price for them. As a matter of fact, he should pay you to take them off his hands because they're just gathering dust and taking up space on his shelves. So with that in mind, and if I don't buy from you today, maybe I'll come back tomorrow. Maybe I'll come back next week. Maybe I won't come back at all. Maybe I'll just go somewhere else. So with that in mind, America goes into this summit by saying, we want a ceasefire at no matter what the cost. This is the last chance summit, kind of like the last chance gas before you go out into the desert. We have no other opportunities after this. Of course, that's nonsense. There's always another opportunity. Even after a war starts, there's an opportunity to negotiate an end to it. And we must come to a conclusion, solution by the weekend to forestall regional war and bring peace in our time to the Middle East. That's the American position. Now, of course, America doesn't really care all that much about the price to be paid because it won't be paying it. It'll expect Israel to be paying the price, but we'll come back to that in a few moments as well. Our Middle Eastern neighbors, both the adversaries and the interlocutors in Egypt and Qatar, look at this bumbling tourist on his way through the bazaar, and they say, wow, we've got another one. Let's play this for all it's worth. So Hamas starts by saying, we're not coming. Last chance summit? Well, we've missed the last chance. We're not even going to show up unless Israel commits to a ceasefire and implements one before the summit. In other words, we'll come negotiate a ceasefire if Israel starts one. Now, Israel will be expected to have a unilateral ceasefire. We're going to keep shooting. But after Israel stops shooting, we'll possibly come and negotiate a bilateral ceasefire with Israel as well. Uh-huh. That makes a lot of sense. But that's not enough. We just don't want a ceasefire. We want Israel to pre-agree to all of our demands before we come to negotiate over them. Now, both of these maneuvers were used by Yasser Arafat back in the day, the late and unlamented, to great effect during the years of negotiating after the Oslo Accords. He would say, well, I don't want to come to negotiate. And America would say to Israel, well, make a few concessions to him, and maybe he'll come to the table and negotiate. And Israel would make some concessions, and he would come and negotiate. And either he would walk out, or he'd agree to something and then not keep it. And a few months later say, well, I don't want to negotiate anymore. And America would say, well, maybe you should give him some concessions to bring him to the table to negotiate, etc., etc. It worked very well for Arafat, not so well for Israel, but it was very effective. And Yahya Sinwar, who's no fool and who knows history and who understands who the players are, is playing exactly the same game. Qatar, not exactly an uninterested neutral party in all of this, although they try to play the game, says, oh, we'll make sure that Hamas is properly represented, whether they show up or not. In other words, it's okay. We can negotiate for them. After all, we agree with them anyway. So why not just let us negotiate in good faith? So that's on the Hamas side. And by the way, that it raises another interesting question, perhaps for a later discussion. Since when do you negotiate in good faith with murderers, kidnappers, rapists, and body snatchers? Just a thought. America expects Israel to do that, and to do that through intermediaries like Qatar, who are basically supporting the terrorists. But never mind. Another very important mission, objective of the United States in this summit is to prevent an Iranian and Hezbollah strike on Israel, because that might upset the ceasefire. They don't really care all that much if Israel gets hit, but if Israel escalates after it gets hit, it could ruin the chances of a ceasefire. It might even upset a ceasefire if one has already gone into effect. The Iranians understand this perfectly, and they have said that they will hold back on their revenge strike on Israel if a ceasefire comes into effect. Maybe. Now, American aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines and marine amphibious forces in the region have very little effect on Iran's thinking, don't you think? Well, maybe they do. So Iran says, no, we'll be good guys. We'll go in on this negotiating. We might even send representatives. After all, we've got a stake in this as well. And we'll hold off until we see that our team gets what it wants. And then we'll decide whether we really do need to exact revenge for the killing of a Palestinian Hamas terrorist on our soil that we think Israel did. By the way, I think Israel did it too. Hezbollah says, well, you guys can negotiate all you want. That we don't have to hold to any of that. We will launch our strike whenever we feel like. Ceasefire or no ceasefire, we owe the Israelis a vengeance strike, and we're not going to be done out of it. And we'll hold off for the time being because we'd like to see our team, Hamas, Iran, and friends, get the best deal they possibly can out of this bizarre, in both sense of the term, bizarre that America is dragging Israel into. And of course, once it all starts, both sides will be expected to compromise. Hamas will be expected to accept a ceasefire, which they need desperately, or maybe not. Israel, on the other hand, will have to compromise as well. Israel is going to have to allow Hamas to regain power in the Gaza Strip. Now, it's not going to be called that, but simply allow them to rearm, rebuild, and re-enter with armed force into all those neighborhoods in northern Gaza that Israel cleared and is continuing to clear as terrorist forces continue to seep in there. Rebuild the tunnel system, rebuild their fortifications, rebuild their headquarters, and then 3, 4, 5 years down the road, give October 7th another round, maybe with a little bit better effect. as long as it gets rolled down the road at least 5 years, so that if this administration continues for another 4, it'll happen after they're gone. So to summarize, America wants a ceasefire desperately. Hamas is actually bipolar on this. On the one hand, Sinwar would like a ceasefire. He could use a breather. His forces are getting very badly beaten up, despite what CNN says. But at the same time, he would like nothing better than to see a regional war break out. That was his whole purpose on October 7th to begin with. He would love what he calls the broadening of the resistance, that Hezbollah, Iran, the militias, the Houthis, the Palestinians of the West Bank, even the Israeli Arabs, would launch a massive simultaneous attack on Israel. That's really his general strategy. Although it's thinned a bit over the months, these last weeks or so have given him a great deal of new confidence that he might be able to pull it off. So Sinwar's in a position of win-win as far as he's concerned. Either he gets his ceasefire and gets to rebuild, or he gets his regional war, in which case, in his hope, Israel gets destroyed. I see an outcome somewhat differently. Iran gets to play the peacemaker, war maker. Ultimately, they decide. And they've won that round already. Peace or war in the Middle East right now depends entirely on the whims of Ayatollah Khamenei, the Americans, the Brits, the Israelis, the Egyptians. Everybody is sitting and hoping that Khamenei goes for peace and not for war. And Hezbollah, of course, remains in a position of spoiler. They can do whatever they want. Even though they're getting their orders from Iran, Iran can distance themselves from anything that Hezbollah does. If Lebanon gets beaten up, well, anyway, Israel is going to be blamed for it. And Hezbollah certainly doesn't care all that much, and Iran cares that much less. So that's the situation going into the last chance summit to bring peace in our time to the Middle East. We're going to watch closely over the next 48 hours, and let's see how this bizarre plays itself out. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.